Today is May 1st, 2023. I want to talk about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. I want to start, as usual, taking a look at the map. This is liveuamap.com. This is a very pro-Ukrainian live map, so just keep that in mind as we take a look at it. And as we can see, there are air defense icons. This is because for the last several days, Russia has been launching multiple large-scale missile attacks all across Ukraine. We are also seeing explosions far behind Russian lines. This is Ukraine targeting places like Melitopol, which are speculated to be one of the targets of the upcoming offensive. And that's what we're doing. We're waiting for Ukraine to launch its spring offensive. We also see the Western media now referring to it as the spring-summer offensive, because apparently it is being pushed back. At least that's what we're told. We got to keep an eye on Avdiivka outside of Donetsk city. This is the location where Ukrainian forces have been shelling the civilian population of Donetsk city for since 2014. Really, you could see that it is encircled. There are airstrikes carried out in Avdiivka, and of course, the other very serious situation for Ukrainian forces, Bakhmut. Bakhmut here, and as you can see, Ukrainian-held territory is just the very edge of the city. The vast majority of it is controlled by Russian forces, and as you can see, what is happening is the front line is straightening out. And I just want to point out that directly to the east of Bakhmut is Popasnaya. Popasnaya is east, and it's quite a bit of a ways east of Bakhmut, but is almost directly east of Bakhmut. And I'm pointing that out because there's this obsession on both sides, commentators, the general public, over who holds Bakhmut. I want to point out that General Sergei Surovikin, late last year when he took over, and it was his responsibility to stabilize the line of contact, come up with a plan of action moving forward. He said the plan of action was to grind down Ukrainian forces. So it was not to take territory. So although territory is being taken in and around Bakhmut, Soledar has been taken, this is not what Russia is prioritizing. They are prioritizing the destruction of Ukrainian forces while preserving their own manpower and equipment. That said, when will Russian forces take Bakhmut? I don't know. I don't even know if they will, because one of the possible axes of the upcoming offensive could possibly be a large-scale attack on Bakhmut, to either take it back after Russian forces finally take over the entire city, or to prevent it from being taken in the first place. And so what you will have then, let's look back at the map, you will have Russian forces doing a fighting retreat back to Popasnaya. What is back at Popasnaya? Why do I keep talking about that? I want to point out this New York Times article from December last year. Defenses carved into the earth. Russia is building a vast network of trenches, traps, and obstacles to slow Ukraine's momentum. Will it work? And what they're showing are these layered and extensive defenses that have been constructed in the east and also in the south toward the approach toward Crimea. And if you scroll down, you're going to see, and I've gone over this many times, they have maps showing you the general area. So they specifically point out Popasnaya in the east and Kherson in the south toward the approach to Crimea. And then they also show you what type of defenses. I've gone over this many times. And then a much closer look at where these defenses are. And as you can see, they are between Popasnaya and Bakhmut. I can very easily see a scenario where Ukraine launches part of its main offensive toward Bakhmut, and Russian forces fall back to these defense lines, and in the process wipe out brigades worth of Ukrainian men and equipment. Where is it in the south? We keep hearing about this obsession with taking cities like Melitopol and cutting the land bridge between Crimea and the rest of Russia, reaching the sea. reaching the coast. Where are these defenses? They're actually southwest of Melitopol. That's what the New York Times is indicating. They are all along the Dnieper River, and they are all along the approach toward Crimea. And so what I'm saying is that Russian forces are much further north of this line in the south. They're much further west of the main defense lines in the Donbas region. They have a lot of space there to fight against Ukrainian forces, wear them down, wipe them out as they're moving back toward these defense lines. By the time they reach those defense lines, Ukrainian forces will have been slowed down, worn down, and they are not going to have the ability to overcome these defenses. At least that is one potential scenario that could play out. When we look at the offensives late last year in the fall, which again, they were supposed to be spring, summer offensives, they ended up as fall offensives. In Kharkov, Ukraine had success because there were hardly any Russian forces there to begin with. When they did reach significant numbers of Russian troops, they had been fighting some troops, and they had been targeted by longer range Russian weapons. By the time they reached concentrations of Russian forces in defensive positions, the offensive ground to a halt. In Kherson, where Russia did have some defensive positions, not quite as extensive as what the New York Times is reporting, there were, again, brigades, many more brigades worth of men and machines lost fighting in Kherson until Russia made the decision to cross the Dnieper River to the East Bank, consolidate the line of contact there, and this was kind of a loose end that they wanted to tie up before going into the next phase of the operation. So I just want to lay that out ahead of this upcoming offensive and to prepare people for the possible outcome. A lot of people are saying that there will be no offensive. I think that there will be an offensive. A lot of people say that it'll be a complete flop. I wouldn't count on that. What is actually shaping up here is that, yes, Russia has more equipment. They have more trained manpower along the line of contact. Ukraine has significantly less heavy equipment and properly trained manpower. What they will do is not stretch that out across the entire line of contact and fight the Russians. They're going to concentrate it and try to overwhelm Russian forces locally, break through defenses that way. So this is what Russia has to prepare for. This is how the offensive is going to be fought, and that means there actually is a likelihood of a breakthrough happening. It's just to what extent. And then, as I always point out, once the offensive ends, wherever it ends on the map, Ukrainian forces have exhausted their trained manpower, their equipment, their ammunition. Where are they getting more to then continue the war of attrition that is actually taking place? Again, this is not a war of territorial conquest. This is clearly a war of attrition. So where are they going to get additional trained manpower, weapons, and ammunition from? And the answer is very unclear. The West seems to have exhausted its resources that it can afford to give Ukraine. Where are they going to get additional resources? So as a matter of fact, no matter how successful this offensive is, if it takes place, it is just going to be a step closer to defeat in this war of attrition rather than a step toward victory. I think it's very important to understand. Speaking of attrition, there are these missile attacks. It's very hard to tell directly after the missile strikes what exactly was hit and how effective these strikes were, but it appears that a lot of the targets were things like warehouses and concentrations of Ukrainian troops, and this looks like a bid to disrupt preparations ahead of the offensive. Again, how effective this is remains to be seen. We saw, let's go back to the map as a matter of fact. One of the attacks was east of Dnipro city in a place called Pavlograd. There were missile strikes there, very serious disruption. The rail stations, warehouses, and other targets were supposedly hit. And you can see how this could be a hub, a logistics hub going either south or east, perhaps both. So that is the nature of these attacks. How is the Western media framing these attacks? There's several salvos over the last couple of days. So this ABC Australia article, just within the last 24 hours, Ukrainian air defenses shoot down 15 of 18 Russian missiles launched in dead of night. So this isn't the entire attack. This is just part of the attack. They're claiming 15 of 18 Russian missiles launched have been taken out. The article says 15 of the 18 missiles launched had been destroyed. Kiev city officials wrote on the Telegram messaging app that all missiles directed at the capital were destroyed. According to preliminary information, no casualties among the civilian population and no destruction of residential facilities or infrastructure had been recorded, the city administrator said. Air defense systems were also called into action to shield the Kiev region, which is a separate administrative entity from the city, from Russian missiles, officials said. Ukrainian media also reported blasts in the Dnipropetrovsk and Sumy regions. Russia has intensified its missile attacks on Ukraine in the past few days. So they're admitting that there have been multiple salvos. This was just the most recent of several. What does this have to do with attrition? This has to do with attrition because Russia apparently is able to make these missiles as fast as they need to use them. This is not the same case for Ukrainian air defense systems and the interceptors that they use. And when they talk about 15 out of 18 missiles, usually they're firing at least two missiles for each incoming target to increase the probability of success. That's a lot of missiles, and they are unable to replace these in a timely manner. This is exhausting Ukrainian air defense systems, not just around places like Kiev, but overall in general. We've talked a lot about this recently, about the degradation of Ukrainian air defenses and how along the line of contact, there are fewer and fewer systems there to provide force protection. This has enabled Russian forces to come in with military aviation, dropping these glide bombs out of range of the sort of mobile systems you would use to provide force protection, but within range of systems like the S-300, which apparently appear to be too far in between to provide adequate protection. Those are most likely around cities. They may also be involved in the upcoming offensive. I'll get into that in just a moment. Now let's talk a little bit more about Russia's ability to manufacture these missiles. We have articles like this. This is from Ukrainian media, the New Voice of Ukraine via Yahoo News. Russia firing at Ukraine missiles made last fall or winter, Air Force says. So they're citing the spokesman of the Ukrainian Air Force. And it says the remains that were found during the last strikes indicate that these are fresh missiles. They were manufactured in the fall, and there are spare parts made in winter. The enemy continues to produce them, but the production rate is low because these are high-tech weapons and they are not produced quickly. But unfortunately, they do continue to produce them. Again, that was the Ukrainian Air Force spokesman. I don't understand what they mean by production rate is low, because apparently they're able to make at least 100, around 100, maybe more of these every single month, and then they are launching them at targets all across Ukraine. They are clearly exhausting Ukraine's air defense systems, which are unable to keep up in terms of producing interceptors to intercept these missiles. So it appears to be another aspect of this war of attrition that Russia is clearly winning. In addition to exhausting the interceptor missiles, these air defense systems use systems like the S-300. The systems themselves have been targeted and destroyed all throughout this conflict. And more recently, there were several videos of S-300 systems in the Kherson region targeted and destroyed, along with some force protection air defense cover, like the German-built Gepard, and also, I believe, a Buk, maybe possibly a Tor air defense system. These were all destroyed with the Lancet drone. Now, the Western media isn't talking about this. I highly recommend that you follow the Duran, Alex Christoforou, and Alexander Mercouris. I'll put the links to their respective channels in the video description below. They've been covering this extensively, and they have talked at length about the S-300. So I don't want to go over that again. They did such a good job covering that. Well, what I will add is what I have seen in the Western media. This is an admission from Army Recognition, which is a military-oriented news site, pro-Western, Western-oriented. It says, Russians destroy first German Gepard anti-aircraft gun system in Ukraine with Lancet drone. And this is dated 29 April 2023. It says, according to a video released on the Russian social media network VK, using a Lancet loitering munition, Russian soldiers have destroyed the first Gepard 35mm self-propelled anti-aircraft gun system donated by Germany to the Ukrainian army. Today, the use of Lancet loitering munitions against modern equipment, combat vehicles donated by the United States and NATO allies is a priority for the Russian armed forces. And we see videos coming out almost daily of Lancet drones destroying high-value targets all across the line of contact. They have a range of between 30 to 40 kilometers, and that they were in range of these S-300s, Gepard and other air defense systems in Kherson is remarkable. And what it suggests, depending on which missiles Ukraine has at its disposal for its S-300 systems, they could be located in Kherson, west of the Dnieper River, and provide air defense coverage for much of the battlefield if Ukraine launches its offensive toward Crimea, from Zaporozhye toward Crimea, toward Melitopol. The S-300s could theoretically provide air cover over the battlefield. But Russia found these S-300 systems, and they've destroyed at least a couple of them. And these are systems that cannot be replaced for Ukraine. There is no way to replace them. There is no alternative. There is no equivalent among NATO nations that they can give to Ukraine to fulfill that role. It's just not possible. What's also remarkable is not just that the Lancet drones got through and hit these air defense systems, the S-300, the Gepard, the Buk, Tor. It's that there's always a spotter plane above. It finds the target, it directs the Lancet toward the target, and it films the entire chain of events that unfold, including the Lancet hitting the target and whatever destruction takes place afterwards. That spotter drone was also intact the entire time, flying over these targets, directing the Lancet drones in to destroy these targets. There appears to be another problem with Ukraine's S-300s. Apparently, and we have seen news of this before, these S-300s, while attempting to intercept incoming targets, they miss, and the interceptor lands and has unintended and terrible consequences, including hitting residential buildings and killing civilians. We see articles like this, and what the Western media has begun doing is claiming that Russia is using the S-300 in a surface-to-surface role. Alexander Mikuris, again, has gone over this in recent videos, talking about how implausible this is, and how this is most likely cover for Ukraine hitting these residential buildings, killing these civilians, obviously by accident, but then attempting to shift the blame to Russia. So here's an article from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. This is a US government-funded media platform. It's talking about Wagner and Bakhmut, but it also talks about Zelensky calling for modern air defenses. That's what I want to focus on here. It says, Zelensky called on Ukraine's allies and partners to supply Ukraine with better air defenses after at least 25 people, including several children, were killed in a wave of Russian strikes on Ukrainian cities, including the capital Kiev, early on April 28. The worst hit was Uman, a city in central Ukraine's Cherkasy region, where at least 23 people, including 4 children, were killed when a Russian missile hit a 9-story apartment building, according to Ukrainian Interior Ministry. As many as 109 people were believed to have been residing in the part of the building that was hit. And if we look at the picture of the damage, this is what we see. And that does not look like a caliber cruise missile, which has a warhead of up to 500 kilograms. The S-300s, on the other hand, has between 100 and 150 kilogram warhead. It's quite a big difference. And that is damage consistent with a much smaller warhead like the S-300. This isn't the only time this has happened. So you saw that damage. Do you remember this episode? This is an article from November last year. Soviet-era anti-aircraft system that misfired on Poland. And this was a missile that was fired by Ukraine. It missed its target. It landed in Poland and it killed 2 Polish civilians. And here's the damage. And that hit an apartment building. You could expect it to make about the same amount of damage. A caliber cruise missile is going to do much more damage. It is used to destroy entire buildings, not just a little corner of one. And I want to point out this article too, also from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Night of Russian terror, deadly missile attacks target Ukrainian city. So there's the same picture. As you can see, again, it is just a corner of the building, inconsistent with the power of a caliber cruise missile. And then they show damage from other attacks. This one, for example, the whole building is gone. Everything in this warehouse is destroyed. Then they show this and they claim this is also from a Russian cruise missile. Impossible. It is impossible that just this little amount of damage was done by a 500 kilogram warhead. So this is what the Western media is doing. They're lumping all of the damage done during these missile attacks, whether it's from Russian missiles incoming or Ukrainian interceptors missing their target and then landing in a residential building and killing people. They lump all of the damage together and then they just blame it on Russia, because why not? Ordinary people aren't going to understand any of this or make the connection. They're also not going to remember the one verified, documented, and confirmed even by Ukraine's Western allies, that incident in Poland where a Ukrainian S-300 missile landed in Poland and killed 2 Polish civilians. Ukraine has carried out its own attacks. So this was in the news recently. This is via Al Jazeera, Qatari state media reported. Ukraine drone strike ignites major fuel blaze on Crimea. Now, this was Sevastopol, in the port area where they have a number of large oil storage tanks. The article says the fire was still burning, but it had been contained and no one was injured. The oil reservoir fire did not cause any casualties and would not hinder fuel supplies in Sevastopol. The 4 fuel tanks that were hit, they are practically burnt out already. An area of 1,000 square meters had been engulfed in flames. And this was according to the local governor, the Russian governor of this region. Ukraine is obviously going to say, no, it wasn't 4 tanks, it was 10 tanks. They actually are claiming it was 10 oil storage tanks, and that this is going to have a huge strategic impact on Russian military operations. But this is what they say after every attack. The problem is Ukraine is unable to carry out attacks like this often enough or on a large enough scale to make any sort of strategic difference. This is purely for political points. This is why the Western media has been talking about this for days, because it doesn't happen very often. Meanwhile, Russia is carrying out strikes like this almost daily. And that's how often Ukraine would have to carry out strikes like this to have any impact on Russia's military or industrial power. And then finally, I want to talk about this Politico article here. When Russia is defeated in Ukraine, look to Chechnya. And what this article is doing is laying the groundwork for a much wider narrative pushed by Western governments and the Western media that is not only imperative that we defeat Russia in Ukraine, but we also have to divide and destroy Russia itself, break it up into smaller states. And we also need to do this to China, but that's another story. This is what we're starting to hear more and more from the West. And we look at this article and they're talking about these Chechen volunteers in Ukraine fighting for the regime in Kiev, and how they're all fighting with the hopes of defeating Russia in Ukraine and then traveling to Chechnya and there being an uprising there. And you can see how confused these fighters are. An American flag, a Ukrainian flag, and the Chechen separatist flag there. Now, how many fighters are we talking about? 1,000? 10,000? 100,000? How many fighters, Chechen fighters, are in Ukraine fighting alongside Ukrainian forces against Russia? And if we look here, we see there are around 150 to 200 Chechen volunteers fighting on the Ukrainian side. And they're mostly the sons and grandsons of fighters who fought in the First or Second Chechen War. So 150 to 200, that's not even a battalion. That's not even half of a battalion. That is nothing. That is really nothing. And so Politico is writing an entire article about this, not because something significant is happening right now, but because of something they would like to have happen, that they are laying the rhetorical groundwork for with articles like this. 150 to 200 Chechen volunteers fighting alongside other Ukrainians just shows how illegitimate this idea of Chechnya separating from the rest of Russia is, how vastly many more Chechens are fighting on the side of Russia right now. Tells you everything you need to know. And this is in the same vein as claims that Ukraine needs to liberate Crimea, when the vast majority of the people living in Crimea wanted in 2014 to join with Russia and still want to be part of Russia and want nothing to do with the US installed client regime in Kiev. So the West is focused on propaganda because there really is nothing of substance to talk about, nothing that they want to admit in regards to what's actually happening on the battlefield right now. However, again, I'm going to highly recommend people do not underestimate the upcoming Ukrainian offensive. Again, they're going to try to concentrate what they do have at one or just a few points along the line of contact, overwhelm Russian troops there. There may be a breakthrough. They may take large amounts of territory. They may even reach the coast. But the problem is, once they do, they won't get any further than that. And they will be surrounded by Russian forces who have conserved their manpower and equipment, and most importantly, have plenty of ammunition to spare, and they will then continue the war of attrition that has been grinding Ukraine down. Again, this is a war of attrition. It isn't just one cycle where Ukraine launches its offensive, loses all of its men, equipment, is out of ammunition, and NATO simply resupplies them and they're ready to go again. There are accumulative effects that are starting to add up that NATO cannot rectify. They are adding up, and it is going to eventually lead to a complete collapse of Ukraine's fighting capacity. This is what Russia is working towards. This is why they are focused on a war of attrition rather than an obsession with territorial conquest. So we'll keep an eye on this. We'll continue waiting for the Ukrainian offensive to unfold. Some commentators are claiming that it has already begun, and it's going to be a step-by-step process where it increases in intensity, and it's not going to be like Kharkov, where there's this sudden rush and grab for territory. It'll be more like Kherson, where the intensity kept building up and up and up until there were these full-scale attempts to overwhelm Russian lines of defense. So we'll just continue keeping an eye on it. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to my channel. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Also in the video description below are all of the links that I referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. If an ad pops up, please feel free to skip it. It's not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee or through Patreon. Again, the links to both of those and several other options are in the video description below. To everyone who has been helping out, thank you so much. Whether it's one time a month or a one-time donation, it's all greatly appreciated. I also greatly appreciate people helping share this work with other people, getting the word out there. That is the main point of me doing this work. I greatly appreciate all of that support. So again, thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.